Hey guys, this is David Jelks, and we're just getting ready here. I'm trying to get, there we go, trying to get all my bits and pieces organized here. I'm still not, I'm still haven't quite figured out this technology piece here, but I'm working on it. Yeah, so for this Facebook Live, I see a lot of people jumping on it, of course, and a lot of people getting excited about using it, and I am too. But I gotta tell you, I'm not, definitely not the best at it. All right. Perfect. Yeah, so we're just going to give it a few minutes here for everybody to come on board, and yeah, it's actually going to be kind of a interesting topic. I find well, there's lots of interesting topics. That's the problem. There's so many things that interest me, and so little time to either talk about it or read about it and study it. So it's I don't know how somebody specializes in just learning one thing. How do you do that? But there's so many things to be interested in. How you doing, Robin? And of course, we chose this time because we want to be able to. It'll be recorded as well, so we want to be able to reach out to our friends in Australia. Hi, Cassie, how you doing? And yeah, this is awesome. Perfect. So we went out and bought. I went and bought a Wi-Fi router booster. So we spent a couple $100. Got a new modem. Yeah, so we're trying to make sure that it doesn't freeze. Like, what an ugly thing to be frozen for 2 or 3 minutes. Good, Rob. I'm glad it's coming through loud and clear. It's perfect. Yeah, it's yeah, the chemistry of mindset. It's if you spend enough time in this field of interest between physiology, there's of course psychoimmunology. There's what else do we have? We have, of course, we have spirituality, we have physics, we have magic, we have so many different conversations over the years, all talking about the same thing. Hey, Richard, don't get into trouble, my friend. People watching from work, that's it. As long as you're not doing anything dangerous, like looking after a nuclear power plant, and you should be looking at where the needle's moving. Yeah, it's emotional biochemistry. Actually, it was an interesting one that I was reading an article today, and there's just so much amazing information, so much information, amazing information out there on how this stuff works. And I know some of you I've worked with personally, one-on-one, and we know how powerful our mindset is. But I think we have a tendency to think that what's going on inside of our mind is just an abstract series of thoughts, and it's urethral, it's esoteric, it has no real substance. When really, it's electrochemical. Hey, good morning, Tony. That's good. So listen, tell you what, it's 3:05, and we're gonna start with the conversation. And and the reason why I chose this topic, because it's a hugely fascinating one for me. And I think once you go through some of this understanding and some of this information, I think you'll find it pretty amazing yourself. Is that it's for centuries we've always looked at kind of the mind and the brain, and especially in Western medicine, Western concept. Okay, there we go. The mind and the brain. We always kind of thought about it as being two separate things, and of course, when you look at Eastern cultures and Eastern medicine philosophy, we do recognize that it's not. Of course, this thing is so heavily connected that there's nothing that we can do in one part of the body that doesn't affect any of it. I mean, just think about something as simple as just banging your thumb, right? You hit your thumb with a hammer. How much is your thumb involved in your day-to-day activities? Right? Every time you can't function without your thumb, and if your thumb's hurt, or any part of your body. Anytime something here doesn't work the way it's supposed to work, we're not in that beautiful homeostasis where everything's running even keel. It's very disruptive. And we're not aware of the two to 3,000 chemical interactions that are occurring in each of our 50 to 60 to 70 trillion cells that are occurring every single second. Just think about it: 2 to 3,000 chemical interactions and activities happening with each individual cell every single second. Now, and on that, and take that scale larger when you're looking at a 50 trillion plus human organism. That's extraordinary. So, we live in this very bizarre world, this very artificial world. And I've talked and written about this before, where, we used to have manual labor that created enough physical stress on our body that we became strong naturally. So, so we didn't have to do things like factor 3, right? We didn't have to be in the weight room. We didn't have to strength train. We didn't have to do it consciously. But it's an artificial environment where we basically removed all the necessity for any physical stress on the body. Now we have to artificially reproduce manual labor, correct? So it's something we have to think about, and this is about the whole aspect of us becoming more conscious in our day-to-day life. We've altered our dietary food supply. We've altered the soil. We've altered our farming practices so dramatically that now we have to artificially support our diet with supplementation, right? Because without it, the world, of course, we see people just not thriving very well. So it's another switch up where now we have to be more self-aware about our dietary practices, because pretending things are just happening like they used to, of course, it's a fool's journey, and we see how sick the world is becoming because we're not paying attention to that reality. And then we go to our water supply, and again, all these things, everything has changed so dramatically. Everything's changed so dramatically in our life, and what makes this thing run, that of course everything's kind of going sideways. And when you look at when you look at the whole idea of the chemistry of mindset and why it's so important, we look at what happens when we run a negative mindset. And I'm pretty sure that I can talk to anybody that over the last 2 decades working with different individuals, and we ask the question, if you could write down 10 negative things, 10 less than positive things about who you are, and put them down on a piece of paper. You give you a pen, and and I bet you in less than 3 minutes you got 10 listed, and you probably could go on for a few more. And then on the same note, asking you, well, can you put? Are you able? I'd like you to write down 10 positive things about who you are as a human being, and see if you can do it within the same time frame. And of course, we know that most of us really struggle to do that. And why we struggle, of course, is that over a period of time, and it's not just negative environment. Certainly we've lived in, we've had experiences throughout the course of our life that have impacted us a certain way. And belief systems have been developed over time through, of course, through different experiences. But what the fascinating thing is that it's when we look at negative and positive emotions, they're really something we call a neuropeptide. And a neuropeptide is, of course, this protein chemical messenger that relays information from the brain to the body. So if you're curious about it, go look up something called the HPA axis. And HPA stands for hypothalamus, pituitary, and adrenal. And between this HPA axis, this is kind of the stress circuit. And really either puts the body in a state of relaxation or puts the body in a state of fight or flight. And how that gets turned on, how those switches get turned on, of course, is based on our response or reaction to the environment we're living in. The challenge is that it's just when this becomes unregulated, that we get caught up in this day-to-day ongoing stress circuit without even knowing it. And within the stress circuit, of course, we become so stressed out for so long that we actually think it's normal. And I think that's the most devastating part, again, living in this day and age, is that we've been under a state of siege, emotional siege, physiological siege. The stress has been so normal or been so prevalent, we actually think it's normal. And so we're not, so it doesn't bother us anymore, right? So we just think this is how we roll. So now here's something fascinating. Now, this is from an article called Emotional Biochemistry. So you think about it, when you have a thought process, at first it's electrical, right? It's an electrical, the neurons are synaptic, right? So there's electrical response. that is occurring in the brain. And then from that response, it has to then the electrical synapse goes over to the hypothalamus and actually looks for emotional regulation or emotional confirmation. So have an idea, then have an associated thought to that idea. So when the neuropeptides, they float down in through the body and they go out, and of course by the thousands, and they start docking on different cells. So here's the piece from this article on emotional biochemistry. So the receptor, having received a message, transmits it from the surface of the cell deep inside the cell's interior, where the message can change the state of the cell dramatically. A chain reaction of biochemical events is initiated as tiny machines roar into action and directed by the message of these messengers begin any number of activities, manufacturing new proteins, making decisions about cell division, opening and closing ion channels, adding or subtracting chemical groups. In short, the life of a cell, what it's up to at any moment, is determined by which receptors on its surface and whether those receptors are occupied by certain chemicals or not. And on a more global scale, these minute physiological phenomenon at the cellular level can translate into a large change of behavior, physical activity, or even mood. Okay? So again, a bit of a mouthful. So essentially what happens, you think about this thought process, I think a certain way, and perhaps as a chronic way of thinking. I have the electrical, the neurons are firing together and they're wiring together. I have emotional chemical regulation from the thought process. So the gland in my brain is sending neuropeptides out to the body, and these neuropeptides, these chemicals, are actually binding. They're binding on receptor sites. Now, the outside of a cell only has so many receptor sites, and over a period of time, what can happen is that for a chronic way of thinking, a chronic way of feeling, we can actually develop more receptor sites. We'll become more accustomed to the neuropeptides of misery, anger, jealousy, frustration. Because remember, we gave them a name, but they're actually chemical messengers. So the cells become so accustomed and acclimatized to these chemical messengers coming from the brain about all these various states. And they could be good ones as well. I mean, I'm not saying everybody's miserable and frustrated. But it's important to really regulate our thought process, because this is what's occurring. And over time, as these cells replicate, as we know cells do, they can develop an affinity and develop more docking sites and more receptor sites for these emotions rather than for the nutrients which keep them healthy. Does that make sense? So you have a cell, and all the receptor sites on the outside can actually start changing their preference for what they allow to dock to them. So let's say I have receptor sites, and on the outside I require a certain variety of amino acids, and let's say B complex and zinc, for example. So it's designed that way because these nutrients are really required to keep that cell, to actually turn the switches on the cell on and keep it active and keep it healthy. But the chronic way of thinking, let's say I'm a bit malnourished, so my diet's poor, which globally it is, and have a chronic stressed out way of thinking. So the new chemistry that's bathing the cell actually starts finding docking sites, and over time the cell adapts, which we know we do. The cell starts to adapt to this new incoming message, and as it replicates, it develops more receptors for the emotional state that we're in chronically, and less receptor sites for the proteins that keep it healthy, and the zinc and the B complex and all these other things that really were supposed to be there from our natural design. I'm trying to reconnect here. All right. So again, the fascinating part is realizing that's what's happening. So, there's a few books that actually talk about that quite well. One is one by Dr. Bruce Lipton called The Biology of Belief. And this actually came out quite a few years ago, an extraordinary book. And it really does make a big difference on our perceptions, because when we look at positive thinking, and of course our social media is just, I would say, littered with positive thinking and positive quotes. And historically it used to kind of irritate me because I'd see all these things about all the time, and I just say, well, people are just trying to be too positive. But it's actually, in hindsight, it's actually not a bad thing, because the more positive messages we can see, the more likely we are to interfere with our ongoing thought processes. Another incredible book. Oh, let me straighten this up here. Another great book I started reading, and it's well read, of course, called The Anatomy of the Spirit, written by Carolyn Myss. She's actually written quite a few great books, and she talks about. There's a video, if you look on YouTube, Why People Don't Heal by Carolyn Myss, and it's MYSS. and she really actually puts down to why people don't heal for a lot of reasons, and the primary reason is because of emotional states that are just not are just unending, emotional states that just are not that are not dealt with. Let's say frustration, or the inability to forgive, of course, is a big one for her. The lack of forgiveness. And of course, it's not just an emotion, it's a series of chemical neuropeptides that actually challenge the body and of course, challenge our various organs because of this chronic way of being. So this is chewing up a lot of energy on my phone here, so I'm going to power it up here. Thought we were doing good, but 1 second here. I'm in, this is happening live here, right? So all these things will happen. All right. Trying to make it dizzy by moving it around too much. All right, there we go. Okay, thanks for your patience. Oh, and crash. All right. Perfect, sorry about that. But again, yeah, so the fascinating thing is, as I've gone through the years of reading and of course compiling more and more books, I realized that the conversation's been all the same. So we understand that that our thought processes are electrochemical, and we understand that the chemical processes that occur have a chronic way of actually acting on the body, which actually ties into another conversation I've been having with something called epigenetics. And epi means above, of course, so we're talking about above genetics. So we have a genetic profile, and our genetics, of course, are simply the DNA and the prescribed way that the body should evolve and should unfold. But that's our tendency and the possibility, but it's not a destiny. What happens, of course, is that along this genetic chain, it's waiting for and looking for chemical messengers to turn switches off, then turn switches on, shut switches off. And that, of course, can be done through dietary regulations. So changing the way I eat, changing how the body functions. And we look at every disease out there generally has a nutritional deficit attached to it. So having a way of being able to regulate disease, of course, in nutrition, we've known forever. But we really haven't had the same conversation when it comes to our mental state, though we've talked about it. It's kind of loosely correlated between yoga and meditation and Qigong. Well, I shouldn't say loosely correlated. There's lots of evidence out there, but a lot of us simply haven't put those pieces together in a real powerful way. And it's something, of course, I've been endeavoring to do more and more. But when we look at epigenetics, of course, we realize that the nutritional piece is one thing, but our thought process, of course, has the same powerful effect. Our thought process can really challenge the way that our genes express themselves. And if you see somebody, in the 70s and 80s, and they look young and vibrant and amazing, they're generally not going to be really cranky and angry all the time. You're going to find a very unique mindset and a way of being in the world that's actually very unique to their state of health. So it's an interesting conversation, right? So we know that our diet has a massive effect on, of course, the way our genes express and how the cells function and reproduce. And we know that our mindset, of course, is a series of not just positive thoughts or negative thoughts, but of course is a series of electrochemical reactions that actually change the way our cells function, and of course how the cells replicate and multiply over time. The interesting thing and the most challenging thing I think that I've read and recognized is that science looks at it and saying that your chronic way of thinking, because it's a biochemical reaction, it can actually make the genes express that way, not only in you, but in your children and in your grandchildren. Right, so your attitude and your way of life actually can be encoded and affect generations of individuals. And I find that kind of interesting because when you look at cultures, perhaps maybe more violent cultures or cultures that are always in disarray. They've been fighting for 2,000 years. Yes, it's part of the political social environment, but I wonder if actually sometimes it's actually built into the DNA of the human being, because it's just been like that for so long, and we know that our environment actually changes who we are. So it's always interesting to look at how far-reaching our thought process really is. As physics will always tell you, the science of physics, it's a weird and wonderful universe we live in. So how do you regulate it? So knowing that your thoughts are actually making you sick or making you better, or potentially affecting your grandchildren, how do you change the chemistry of mindset? And I think one of the things that we can look at, and this will go into another field of interest of mine called neuro-linguistic programming, and start looking at realizing that the brain stores information via our senses. So all incoming data is basically neutral, right? So we have visual, auditory, kinesthetic, olfactory, gustatory, right? So I see something, right? I hear something, I taste something, I feel something. So all these experiences, right, that we get are relatively. Hang on. So when I take these neutral experiences into my body has to actually take them and code them in a very particular way. So, for example, and I've used this example quite a bit. When I was 4 years old and walking across a 2x4 over a drainage ditch, I fell into some water. So falling into the water, I started thrashing around. Of course, I was in a drowning state because the water was filling my lungs. So my experience, my recall of that experience is going to be, in the beginning, it's going to be, in my mind, I see it as visual. Of course, I see it, right? So the visual context of the memory was coded that way. The second part of it, of course, is going to be kinesthetic. And part of it's actually feeling the water on me, the coldness on the water on my skin, and the water in my lungs. And auditory is a very powerful one as well because I hear myself screaming underwater. So the memory is stored in that way. So I have a visual, I have a kinesthetic, and I have an auditory algorithm of that memory. And so one of the challenges was that, of course, if I'm out swimming, and this happened to me several years ago off the coast of Belize, and I was out swimming in the Barrier Reef, and I lost one of my flippers, and the water was moving pretty aggressively. And I'm not a very light swimmer. I swim like an anchor, and but part of that memory started to come back up, and the neurochemistry of the emotion of terror entered back into my body. Yet I can swim. I'm healthy. I'm strong. I can swim, and it proceeded to shut down my capacity to move. So the boat wasn't too far away, but I tell you, I wasn't having any fun. I got on board, grabbed my flipper, went back out, and then went back into the water, and I got over it rapidly because I'm very self-aware of these pieces and understand what's happening. But the challenge is, how do you, with all these emotions, are they just there? Are we going to be the victim of these potentially poisonous neuropeptide emotions occurring in our brain? Or can we go back and actually change the algorithm? And of course, in truth, you can. So with that memory, because it's a visual, auditory, kinesthetic memory, I can go back and I can recode it. Of course, I can change the aspect of the auditory, I can change the aspect of the visual, and I can change the aspect of the kinesthetic component. So for me, because the visual aspect was the first one that come up, and when I think about that memory, it actually comes up, and my brain will give me the image actually up quite close. Because the image is so up close and personal, it means that it's very relevant and it's very on my mind, it's very top of mind. So the impact, of course, of the emotion is going to be greater. And I'll give you a little thing to try here right now, just so you have an idea how to play around with it. So imagine right now you're sitting in your car and you're at a movie theater, right? And the outdoor movie theater, right? Obviously, because you wouldn't have your car parked inside of a inside of a theater, right? So you're outside in a movie theater, parked in your vehicle, and you have this giant big screen in front of you, okay? And let's say it's a funny movie, right? So pick any movie you want, but put it on the giant screen, and of course you're going to be probably 20 or 30 feet away from the screen itself. Now, what I want you to do is actually move the screen a little bit closer to you inside your mind. All right, so move it about 5 feet closer, right? And continue to move the screen, the giant screen in front of you, a little bit closer, because it's a visual component, right? It's primarily visual. And as you move that screen closer and closer, does it change the visceral response? Does it change the kinesthetic reaction inside your body? Does it feel different? And the likelihood as you move that screen closer and closer towards you, or that picture closer and closer towards you, the intensity of the emotion is going to change. It's going to become greater. Right? Because we're changing the visual aspect of it, right? So bring it really, really close, so you're almost like nose to picture. Get yourself up that close, and pay attention, of course, and pay attention to the emotional state that you're in, right? So you have the movie screens up. You pull it all the way here, and again, does it or does it not actually have a different feeling of being up this close? I think you'll find that it makes a massive difference. Take that same image and push the image further away from you, back to its original spot, 20, 30 feet away from you. So when the image is 20, 30 feet away from you, is it a different feeling? Do you get a different kinesthetic response from having the image further away? Yes or no? Right? So if it's 30 feet away and it feels a bit more neutral, push the image 160 feet away. Right? Push it about 160 feet, as far away as you can get it. And the further the image goes on the horizon, the less of a visceral response, the less of the kinesthetic response we'll have to that emotion. So you realize that regardless of what we experience in our day-to-day life, it's just all memories are stored. They have to be stored and coded in an algorithm that's comprises of visual content to it, a visual, auditory, kinesthetic, olfactory, and gustatory. Because that's how we code information. That's our senses. And so the coding gets stored in the brain. And the unfortunate part, well, not the unfortunate part, but the reality of it is that we live via our memories, because it gives us a reference point. It's like a child's game, right? We put 50 cards down, face down, you flip one up, and there's a turtle, and now you look for the other turtle. Well, all incoming information, the brain has to make sense of it somehow, because we very, very rarely live in novelty or brand new experiences. We always associate it with something we've already experienced. And unfortunately, well, not unfortunately, but the reality of it is that if you've lived on this planet, you have a birth certificate, something's kind of screwed with your walk in life, right? So we generally have a negative reference point for lots of things, right? It's the only color I had. We have a negative response for lots of things in our life. And unfortunately, it's much easier for us to go back and connect with the negative responses. So when it comes to a lot of memories, let's say around exercise, a lot of people have very negative connotations around exercise. And it's not the memory just per se. It's not about the conversation. It's the emotion that's evoked. It's the chemical messaging from the memory that evokes the response, right? So if you're in grade 5 and somebody calls you a little tubby because you're a little bit overweight and yet your growth cycle hadn't started yet, so your body will still hold on to some baby fat, and you're destined to be 6'5", but you remember being called, this tubby kid in grade 5. Well, there's the memory of it. Of course, you see the person talking to you, right? So it's the visual. You remember that little SOB that you want to punch right in the mouth for being so mean. So you had the memory of seeing them, right? You had the auditory component of them talking to you, right? Giving you the message about who you are, as a tubby little kid. And then you created an emotional response based on what you thought that meant. So it's coded visual, auditory, kinesthetic, right? It's coded in your brain. So when you bring the memory back, do you feel the same sort of anxiety, frustration, low self-esteem, all the emotions that were relevant to the emotions of a child in grade 5? Absolutely, right? So we wonder why as adults we struggle with our emotions around lots of different things, because we're operating at the emotional maturity of somebody in grade 5, or somebody in grade 10, or somebody at the age of 5, or somebody at the age of 21. And you name it, no matter where you are along that timeline, the chemistry of your mindset comes from the various levels of emotional immaturity that really, up to present, have not been brought forward. So something I like to challenge myself with on an ongoing basis is I like to give myself a third person perspective when it comes to when I'm feeling less than adequate, feeling less than secure about my path in life. Anytime I'm feeling negative, anytime I'm a little bit frustrated, I'll always talk in the third person, which may make me seem a little strange and perhaps a little crazy, but I'll always ask, what is his problem? Not why do I feel this way, because it has nothing to do with me. I think I'm a fairly evolved human being. I'm well read. I know enough of this stuff that I really should have a much different life. If that 10-year-old in my head would just go away, I'd be gold, right? If the emotional states, the negative emotional states of the mistakes and misgivings and experiences and traumas we've all experienced would just go the freak away, we'd be gold. But they're experiences. So, and what I think we're being told to do, and this is more from perhaps a spiritual point of view, is actually when we have these negative emotional states, we instead of actually thinking that they belong to us as far as an experience that's happening in real time, we can go back and look at them and realize there's various aspects of our emotional states that have never been fully matured. So with that child who was 5 years old, myself, when I fell into that drainage ditch, I remember actually I was sitting at home in the loft, and I was fairly tired, so I decided to meditate. So I put on some headphones, had some meditation software, and all of a sudden I went back to that point in time. And when this kid was walking across a drainage ditch, myself as an adult went back, and this is and I didn't plan for this to happen. This kind of unfolded as the relaxation ensued. But myself as an adult walked by him, and I grabbed hold of his hand and I walked him across that 2x4. I changed the reference. And the funny thing happened just after that is that as soon as I did that, the 5-year-old version of me jumped on my back and hung on like I was his big brother. And see, at that point in time, a lot of things were going on. My parents were divorced, and there was just a lot of chaos inside of our family. So there's a lot of emotional insecurity that was occurring all at the same time, and almost drowning didn't make me feel any better. But the fascinating part, though, is that what I did so powerfully and inadvertently through meditation was I went back and I changed the emotional state or the electrical chemical state of that memory, which minimizes the dramatic effect it can have on me today as an adult. Right? So all our experiences, again, just very quickly, all our experiences that we have, and especially the negative ones, is that they're just asking for us to go back and change the algorithm, go back and actually walk that path, but third person. So again, speaking from at a point of frustration, if I'm angry and I'm frustrated, I'll laugh at myself. I'll laugh at the person who's frustrated because I know I'm more evolved than that, right? At least I should be at this point in time in my life. So because I can bear witness to the frustration of another part of me who's reacting to the event, I don't take it on. And what generally happens is that I can use my intelligence and use all the stuff that I've learned, and you can do the same because I know, if you guys are here listening to this, you've done lots of work. You've done a tremendous amount of work, but it's actually putting into play and actually docking it. The more times I can actually disassociate away from the negative emotional state, be the observer, use my intelligence and actually rewire how those memories are stored, the less likely I am to react that abruptly the same way the next time around. And the more times I change the chemistry of my thought when it comes to various elements of my life, the more likely the cells in the body are going to be getting a different experience of the chemical messengers that are docking on them. So over time, we'll probably find, and it does take time, right? Because we're a complicated machine. Over time, we'll find that our reaction to negative stimuli will become less. The intelligence that we've accrued in the last years of our life can actually be sent back to the earlier days of existence. So the trauma that we had when we were 13 and 15 and 20, and all the negative experiences and all the things that really affected us in a negative way through the course of our life, we can actually go back and change the chemistry of that mindset occurring at that time. Right, but it takes a very self-aware person to not step into the content of the memory, but look at the context of it. So we deal with context, not content. The content's the story. The context is when I'm third person, I realize that it's a visual, auditory, kinesthetic story, and I'm going to change how that algorithm is setting. So neurolinguistic programming, I would advise you guys to go through and look at some material on it. Actually work with somebody who's actually really well qualified as an NLP therapist. There's books and articles and videos, a tremendous amount of information on it. But neurolinguistic programming, meditation, qigong, yoga, all those things really give you an opportunity to slow this thing down and realize that just because you thought it doesn't mean it's true. So we're 3 minutes over the half hour. I don't want to keep you guys here all day, but it's a fascinating thing. And the reason why I do these broadcasts, because I know how much time and money and effort I've invested into my health and to my psychology and my spirituality, really wanting to really live a much different life than I've experienced in the past. And I know so many of us, of course, want that as well. And if any of this information one takes the stress off of you, where you realize it's not your fault. How the freak would you know? This is complicated. We're a complicated machine. It's a very strange and wonderful world we live in. But it gives you a pause to think a little bit more and take action on the areas that you perhaps haven't taken action on as of yet. Then it's been a good day. So we really, again, don't want to over-identify with the negative thoughts in our mind because they're just echoes from the past. We have the capacity and the skill, and of course, and really the desire, I think, for all of us to go back and actually rewrite our history into a more positive connotation. So the chemistry of our mind and our mindset will actually affect our body in a massively positive way. All right, guys, this is David Joke signing out. Hope you guys have an extraordinary day. And Sarah, yes, it's my purple shirt. It's the only one I had clean here, right? Okay, guys, take care. Have a wonderful one.